It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And this is a breaking news segment from us because we may have an antitrust agreement. First things first, hope you're doing well, but we're just going to dive right in if that's cool with you.
That's perfectly fine.
All right. So UFC released a statement this morning, literally about an hour and a half ago, regarding the antitrust suit. What was it?
Well, the statement they released is that on today, they reached an agreement with the plaintiffs to settle all claims asserted in the Lee class. And it's going to be for an aggregate amount of $375 million. Payable in installments over agreed upon time. They don't give the exact time frame, but you imagine it'd be very quick. And so this $375 million would, if agreed to by the judge, we have to wait for the judge's approval. But this $375 million would be just for Lee. And if people remember, the previous settlement was for $335 million, but that was for the Lee class members, Lee v. Zuffa et al. Antitrust suit, and the Johnson et al. V. Zuffa suit. Lee, of course, covers December 16th, 2010 to June 30th, 2017, fighters that fought in the UFC during that period. The Johnson class covers July 1st, 2017 until now. So that instead of splitting it, and the previous split was 90% went to the Lee class. So this 375 is not a 40 million improvement on the previous settlement. It is 75 million improvement for the class of Lee. And Johnson is a separate case that continues on its own. And so people asking about injunctive relief. Injunctive relief is not removed now because Johnson is the one asking for injunctive relief, and that's a separate case that is just in the beginning phase.
How much is this than before? Can you lay out how the math works for that?
Well, the math for this is that the previous settlement was for $335 million. First settlement was 70%, 70 or 75%. I can be mistaken. Went to the Lee class period, and the rest went to the Johnson. And then the judge, rejected that. They brought it back again and said, here is our new offer, 90% for Lee, 10%. And the judge rejected that and then made it clear his problem is not just the monetary amount, which he wanted more for the Lee class. His problem is also that he sees a conflict of interest between Johnson and Lee. So this is great for the fighters in many ways because the plaintiffs, because they separated the class and they have a settlement possibly for Lee and Johnson separate, presenting it again to the judge, $335 million plus $40 million, $375 million, but only for Lee. And we can break down what that would mean for fighters if the allotment, how much they should get paid if you want that.
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, if you're a fighter listening, I'm sure that's your number one priority is what would that mean for me if you're a fighter that fought in the Lee period? Based on this amount, 375, based on let's assume they're going to have the same allocation as they had last time, which is 70% goes to your total compensation, and then 30% of these damages would go to your per bout you fought. So after the attorney's fees, after everything else, there's probably the fees for the experts, as we've talked about before. The antitrust experts are incredibly expensive, but there should be about 250 million, roughly, I'd guess, maybe a little less, but we'll assume 250 million left over for the fighters. That means a simple way to calculate it based on those numbers. If you earned, you would get 30% of all the money you earned from your bout compensation, which is your show win, your show pay, your win pay, your fight of the night bonuses, your pay-per-view bonuses, and any letter of agreements, and any backroom, locker room bonuses, discretionary bonuses. All that stuff counts as compensation. You get 30% of the total you made during the class period, plus about $13,900 per fight. That's the estimate I have right now. So let's just make up a fighter. You fought 10 times the UFC. You made $300,000. You would get $139,000 for the number of bouts you have, plus another $90,000 for your total compensation, the 30% of that. So you'd get about $229,000. So if you're a fighter that fought 10 times the UFC, made 300,000, you should expect around 229,000 to be your settlement payment. So it's going to fluctuate per fighter, but it's going to be sizable for fighters that had, that didn't make much, were at the entry level and fought several times in the UFC at low pay. But and then guys like Conor will make, fairly good money. Conor, if we look at it this time, we calculated last time he'd get around $7 million on the settlement. This time, I'm not going to guess, but he's going to make his settlement be about $8.2 million based on his total earnings during that period where he made $27 million. So he goes up, but who really goes up a lot are the guys at the bottom, because that per bout fight number is going to be a lot larger.
That's fantastic. Now, is this going to be enough for Judge Boulware to actually approve it?
That's the big question, because he hinted that he wants a larger number. Now, there's two things we have to be concerned about. One is, will the judge approve it? And so they're going to have to present it to the judge. And I really don't know if he'll approve it, because the two complaints he had: one, he wants a larger amount. This is larger, but is it large enough? And two, he wanted Johnson done separately. And so he'll be very happy about that part. Even if the judge doesn't agree with this, would UFC increase the amount? So you have to consider that. Will the judge approve this? And would UFC go with the higher amount? Because at some point, there is a chance that the judge rejects this. And maybe like the Silicon Valley high-tech employee case, the judge actually gives him a number or tells him how much more he wants, which would be, great if he rejects it, to actually have an idea what he wants. But then there's the chance too, the UFC, if he wants a lot higher, if he wants a much, much higher number than this, then there's a good chance the UFC looks at it and go, we are just going to go to trial because the damages are the amount for settlement's too close to our damages they're asking for. So there's a lot of stuff to weigh, but I don't know if the judge is going to approve it or not. It's really up in the air based on his comments previously. So we will have to wait and see, but we should know fairly soon. And the other thing, it doesn't, unlike last time when they canceled the trial because a settlement had been reached before the judge approved it. This time he said, I am not stopping the trial unless I approve the settlement. So the trial date still stays the same until he approves the settlement, or if he approves one at all.
So we should know soon.
I would guess. I mean, I have to look at while we're on the air, we could look at the PACER and see if a hearing has been announced at all today, but I haven't seen one yet. It doesn't look like one yet, but we will probably get an update that there will be a hearing soon, a status hearing on this, and we will get word if the judge approves it or not. I am sure. I mean, I don't know how soon, but I'd guess in a couple of weeks we will know for sure.
What happens if the judge doesn't approve it?
Well, if the judge doesn't approve it, we still have the trial. We're going to go to trial. We still have 4 months, too. So there's a chance, let's say the judge indicates an amount he would want that's higher. There's a chance then that the plaintiffs and defendants get together and come up with another settlement agreement that the judge possibly can approve. We still have time for that. But there's also a chance that the defendant, Zuffa, says, we do not like paying anymore, because they want to keep their payments at a minimum, and we would rather go to trial. So I don't know what that number is, but we might find out if the judge rejects this.
Do you think the terms will be the same as the last time?
Oh, for the allocation for the fighters?
Yes.
I'm guessing. I don't know if we have no. They didn't file anything yet saying how it's going to be allocated. I'm guessing it's going to be similar because the first time they filed it, it was 80-20, 80% for your total compensation, 20 per bout. Then they changed it to 70-30. So I don't know the final, but I'm guessing it'd be somewhere in the ballpark of those two previous ones. So we don't know how it's going to be allocated, but if I assume it's going to be very similar to what it was before.
What about the Johnson case? Is there motivation to press forward there? Because, I saw something that they want to have it dismissed or something. I don't know. Is that true?
Well, they filed a motion to dismiss. They claim the Johnson case has no merit. Now, with this judge, I think it's unlikely that happens, right? I think with this Judge Boulware and the way he has ruled over this case so far, I think it's very likely that the Johnson case progresses. Now, for Johnson, the big thing, as we've discussed many times, is the arbitration agreements. When we first settled this, the UFC demanded to the plaintiffs that they settle both Johnson and Lee together, that they would not settle Lee without settling Johnson because they didn't want any future trials. The judge made it clear, though, that for Johnson, he can't agree to any settlement for Johnson because he doesn't even know what their damages is. We haven't even done discovery. And on top of that, he thinks it's unfair, potentially, that a lot of fighters are being held outside the case, that are not allowed to participate because of these arbitration agreements. And no one has challenged him yet. So he's basically demanding that case progress separately, that one, they challenge the arbitration agreements, they being the plaintiffs, so we can find out if they're being upheld by higher courts or not. And so we'll have to wait for that to happen. And two, that we do some discovery and know what kind of damages the Johnson fighters are asking for. And so that way we can determine, what's a fair settlement for them. So Johnson's got a long ways to go because of that. It's at the beginning phase. We talked about our last Hey Not the Face. We talked about the schedule that both sides put forward, which would call for a trial several years down the road from here. So that is a way to go. But a couple things to remember in Johnson. Johnson is asking for injunctive relief. So if the fighters that have arbitration agreements, if the court rules in their favor, the court rules in the favor of the plaintiffs, the fighters, and says those arbitration agreements can't be upheld for whatever reason, and those fighters can enter the lawsuit, suddenly this lawsuit becomes much more valuable to the attorneys because you have a much larger pool of fighters ask for money, and you have fighters with standing that can ask for that injunctive relief. And so it is possible, if they overturn those arbitration agreements, that the Johnson case, because that injunctive relief is so valuable to the fighters, that when that gets closer to a trial, any sort of settlement might be much larger than what we see here, because the UFC, they've made it clear in previous, what they've said previously to the press, especially their lead attorney, William Isaacson, that it's not the damages that's the big concern to the business. It's the business model. It's the injunctive relief. So that's something to keep in mind as well going forward, that Johnson, that the one that the people are hoping will change the sport, the business model, which we'll have to wait for years, but also is the one that has the arbitration agreements taking so many fighters out of it. We will have to see what happens to the arbitration agreement, and then we'll have to see if they can overrule that. Can the fighters get injunctive relief, have standing for injunctive relief, and that kind of changes everything.
The arbitration agreements, you say if they're tossed out or overthrown, who would make that determination?
Well, they would have to go to a court, probably the Ninth Circuit, have to do a ruling on that. And then even after that, it probably, let's say the Ninth Circuit says, because the UFC was already in an antitrust lawsuit previous for the Lee class, Johnson class members should not have to honor these arbitration agreements because they were compelled to do it by monopoly power that the UFC held. Even then, they probably have to go to the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court's the one that's made all these crazy, just insane rulings about arbitration agreements, upholding them almost time and time again. So it makes it, the plaintiffs, I'm sure, the attorneys, they made it clear they're a little nervous challenging it because they're nervous how the Supreme Court would rule. They don't know if the odds are in their favor. But again, the odds might be in their favor. Maybe the case they present, the Supreme Court goes, yes, we've allowed arbitration agreements, but on this specific case, it's a little egregious what the UFC did. So we will deny. In cases like this, you cannot force class action waivers and arbitration agreements on fighters. But we'll have to see what happens on that front.
Do the lawyers have to take the case now? Can they draw back and say, no, we don't want to do this?
No. They have to go forward. And actually, the fighters' attorneys are probably happy because the risk going forward was they've spent tons of money and they just might be out. We've talked about tens of thousands of hours that they don't get paid on because they are working on commission based on if they win the case or not. And they put out of pocket tens of millions of dollars for experts, travel, this other stuff of actual cash. And so the attorneys were, probably sweating bullets for a while. Like, this case could really be financially ruinous for our firms. But if they have a settlement and they have money on this case, well, now they have a return on investment on what they put into this case. And Johnson suddenly looks like, oh, it's not a big money loser now. it's a case we can progress with and roll the dice and potentially, even make more than we made on this case, and do better for our clients, because now we have the leverage, potentially, of an of the injunctive relief. The thing you got to remember is neither side wants to go to trial, right? You never want, in an antitrust suit, you never want to go to trial, because for the defendants, no matter how competent you are, for the defendants, if you lose, there's treble damages, and that's just a ton of money. And then potentially, in the Johnson case, there will be injunctive relief. For the plaintiffs, no matter how much confidence you have in your case and how much money that the case potentially could pay out on treble damages, you don't want to go to trial, because as a federal civil suit like this antitrust case, you have to get all the jurors to agree, right? Decide with you to win. Now, if you have a hung juror, if they don't all agree, then you could still bring the trial back again, but eventually it's just you're spending money and not winning the case. So you don't want to take that risk. On top of that, often the appeal process takes so long, and the appeal process has so many potential risks that you end up settling anyway. So neither side wants to go to trial, and that's the number one thing. And the trick is always to have enough leverage going into trial that you get the biggest settlement as possible. And that, I think that's the number one thing. I should note too, we had talked about this, we never put on the show, but we probably should have seen this coming, because the UFC took out a $175 million margin loan a little while ago. And I think that should have been a clear indicator that they were expecting their stock to rise. And what's a great way to have your stock rise? Have a settlement in a major class action lawsuit settled.
13 days ago, to be exact.
Yeah. So I am guessing that no way to prove it, but I'm guessing they knew that something was coming down the pipe that was going to improve their stock price.
Would a settlement be in the cards for the Johnson case? Because the UFC seems like they're ready to fight over this one, but could it be settled? Like maybe there's no injunctive relief at all. Is a settlement available?
I think eventually it'll probably settle like this if the case progresses far enough, because, again, no one wants to go to trial. But I don't think it's possible to settle based on the judge's comments until they've challenged the arbitration agreements and until we have something that says what kind of damages the fighters have suffered.
Okay.
Until we get those two things, the judge is not going to approve a settlement, I don't believe.
All right. So do you have any final thoughts that you want to wrap up this episode with?
Well, it's a much bigger win for the fighters than before, because the Lee class just got $75 million. And more importantly, the Johnson class has been separate and progresses. But the bigger thing is we have no clue if the judge is going to accept it. And if he doesn't, we have no clue if the fighters can even get possibly more money out of this. Who knows? So it's interesting news, but we are wait and see on this one.
All right. So fine folks out there, this episode is free. Do us a favor, though. Shoot us a subscription. We work really hard on this for y'all, so that's what we need. Anywho, what else I need is for you to follow this guy on Twitter. He is at HeyNotTheFace. His direct messages are open, so if you have questions, comments, suggestions, shoot him his way. You might find yourself mentioned on the show along with your question. So my Twitter handle is Crooklyn MMA. My messages are also open. Anything you send to me about the show makes its way to John. From here, y'all know the drill. Until next time, subscribe and please stay safe.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!